This video is brought to you by one of the most exciting shoutouts I've ever done. Lost in Cold have teamed up with Cook and Becker and Crystal Dynamics themselves to deliver two incredible Legacy of Kain releases. One of them a beautifully detailed and designed official encyclopedia of the Legacy of Kain series, and the other a tabletop role-playing game based on the Seraphon Order's crusade against the Vampire Scourge. These look unbelievably good, plus I'm actually writing the foreword for the encyclopedia, if you can believe that. If you'd like to learn more, click the link below or stick around to the end of the video. Look, I'm not here to tell you that Avowed is terrible, but I'm also not telling you that you should really go out of your way to play it. Some of you might be hearing that and thinking, hey, what gives? You loved the preview build. Well, yeah, I did, but I explicitly said in that preview that 6 hours is never enough time to fully judge an experience like this. Avowed's opening chapter teased an experience with promising foundations that I had hoped would get built on over the rest of the game's 30 to 40 hour runtime. But the reality is that that opening chapter was the strongest part of the game, full of the best locations, characters, set pieces, and dungeons. That chapter was also the one that introduced you to the game's core systems: companions, decision-making, gear progression, stat check, dialogue choices, etc. All of these elements were full of promise, and you could imagine how much deeper and more interesting they'd get after dozens of hours. But the truth is that none of them ever evolved to become truly satisfying in their own right. Like, you can say mean things to your companion, sure, but it never feels as though your relationship to them is truly evolving one way or the other. You can find unique weapons and armor and level them up, but it's just more stats to help you hit the level gaining requirements that are fairly brutal and almost force you to do side content even if you don't want to. So while Avowed ticks all the boxes in terms of what a game like this should contain, it is that mile-wide, inch-deep RPG experience that unfortunately made Dragon Age the Veilguard so disappointing. And look, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comparisons made between Avowed and Veilguard. Both come from legacy RPG developers, and both are returning to the cinematic RPG format for which these studios are best known. Sadly, these games are far more similar than I would have liked. Both of them ape the most superficial aspects of the games that inspire them. They have all of the things you'd expect in a cinematic RPG experience, but when you really look at what those things are, it's all just so surface level. Both of them are best enjoyed as action games rather than RPGs. Both of them suffer from writing that fails to really pull you in or whisk you away, and both of them feel regressive versus the sorts of RPG experiences we used to expect from these studios. So if I didn't recommend Veilguard, why am I offering a more neutral recommendation here with Avowed? Well, the truth is, despite how disappointed I was by many of Avowed's elements, there were some parts that I actually really enjoyed. I really did love that opening area. I think it was a fantastic location that gave me a solid 8 hours of fun. Much of that comes down to the fact that I think the best part of Avowed is its world design, which is not only really intricate and beautiful, but it also encourages you to just go out and get lost in it. Exploration and discovery is a feature of this experience, and the scale and verticality of these open worlds makes it easy for Obsidian to nestle all manner of secrets away in far-flung, hard-to-reach areas. I also think the combat is great. It's got plenty of issues, don't get me wrong, but I can't think of a game where it's this satisfying to play as a spell slinger. I really think Obsidian crushed the fundamentals of this combat model, and that was a huge part of what kept me going. But again, much like Veilguard, Avowed is undone by its writing. It's just not good. The first companion you meet is fantastic, actually, but the remaining three, it was a legitimate chore to have to interact with them. The main plot is painfully generic and awkwardly telegraphs its obvious reveals. What's most disruptive is just how leveraged the dialogue is into proper nouns and exposition dumps. I was very keen to step into this world knowing that it was leaning on 2 prior games worth of lore. I was excited to learn more about a new fantasy setting full of gods and magic and empires and factions. But you know who was more excited about that prospect than anyone? Avowed's writers, because my god, every single conversation with every single person you meet just becomes this massive history lesson, where every second word is highlighted in blue so it can be explained to you using the in-game glossary. The moment-to-moment dialogue is utterly suffocated by Obsidian's obsessive need to explain this world to you, and as a result, character personalities never have the chance to emerge, and the regional storylines that unfold get lost in the noise. So yeah, look, Avowed is fine. It really is. Ultimately, though, it kind of just feels like content. Like it's the Netflix show you watch while you're folding your laundry, or it's the game that you play while you're waiting for a better game to come along. And from a studio as storied and as talented as Obsidian, that's a big disappointment.
In a cycle of reincarnation, watched over by the gods. Your home, the Erdtree Empire, is treasured.
Ah, you want a story? Very well. Settle in.
Avowed is set in the Living Lands, an island in the world of Aora that is a frontier country. Its regions were settled by different categories of outcasts, all of them looking to start anew in a region where the long arm of Imperial law could not reach, and where the old hatreds might be forgotten. But the mighty Aedean Empire is not so content to see this verdant land descend into the miasma of independence and self-governance. As such, they began ceding their local presence for some time, asserting their authority in subtle and unsubtle ways that would eventually position them for a power grab. Set against this are the entrenched factions of criminals, pirates, intellectuals, and nomads who would much rather the Aedeans not be there, all of whom are ready to fight if it comes to that. At this very tense moment, a new plague has befallen the island. It's called the Dream Scourge, and it sends people crazy. It's not understood why this is occurring or how to stop it, but that's where you come in. You are an Imperial envoy, a loyal servant to the Emperor who's been dispatched to figure out what the hell is going on and ideally rid the Living Lands of this plague before it engulfs the whole island. You are the classic blank slate character, bringing little with you but the face and backstory you create in the character created tool. The tool's fine, by the way, nothing special, but it gets the job done. You're then shipwrecked after Dream Scourge maddened soldiers unload cannons into your ship as it nears port, and as you make your way through the game's tutorial area, you start to hear a voice in your head.
We felt your presence like dew on a leaf. We wait. Heed us.
This mysterious voice is in some way connected to the Dream Scourge plague, and as you progress through your adventure, that connection becomes clearer, and you need to face a number of decisions about who to trust or betray, and how to best heal these sickened lands. So that's all the setup, and I wish I could tell you that this interesting premise blossoms into a really rich narrative full of memorable characters, but that is definitely not the case. Easily one of the weakest parts of Avowed is its main storyline, the one involving the voice in your head. It's a spiritual figure of sorts, and they never ever speak plainly. They only ever speak in this circumspect, metaphorical language that's just meant to sound mysterious, but just becomes super fucking annoying after 30 hours of them never really saying what they mean. And it comes so regularly too, like if you only ever had to put up with this every now and then fair enough, but in every major cutscene this voice interjects, adding absolutely nothing but an annoying new collection of similes. Whenever you return to camp to chat with companions or upgrade your kit, you are almost always assailed by this voice as you're trying to leave, a repetitive, static looking dream sequence that involves you just lying on a rock while answering inane questions that amount to absolutely nothing, and from what I can tell have no appreciable impact on the story other than one or two brief and pointless callbacks during later dream sequences. It's all very Baldur's Gate 3 Mind Flayer coded, but like just a bad and mishandled version of that. It's especially frustrating to have to converse with this voice because it's very clear that this voice is not to be trusted. That's not a spoiler, by the way. Like from very early on, it is clear that this voice is hiding a lot from you. You're given dialogue options that allow you to voice that distrust, but our relationship never evolved in recognition of the previous dialogue choices I had made. Like, I tried to be a dick as often as I could when interacting with his voice because I could tell that something fishy was going on, but every time we'd start up a new conversation, it was like we were always beginning from a neutral position. The voice didn't register or remember any of my previous hostility, so every new conversation could still involve that voice reaching out to me with affection, and I too could offer my unqualified love and support for them just moments after having told them that they should burn in hell or whatever. I know other RPGs like this are often guilty of something similar, but it's far more noticeable here in Avowed because the same sort of problem is present in every interaction I have with characters and companions throughout the game. There's no moral alignment system, no factional standings, no relationship meter for your companions. There are definitely some decisions you can make that characters and companions will reflect back on, and that may open or close some doors for you in terms of gameplay or quest progression, but these feel like binary switches rather than more organic feeling relationships. This actually taps into one of Avowed's biggest shortcomings, its inability to deliver a truly reactive experience, one that turns consequence into something you can see and feel, rather than just something that is and has to be explained to you. But I'll talk more about that later. Getting back to that main storyline, it is not good. It really just leads you by the nose from one frustrating half reveal to the next. It's so painfully generic, it really is. It has almost a paint by numbers feel to it. You know, empires and inquisitions and rebels and pirates and the outcast mage class and the dwarves and their chiseled rock fortresses. It is 30 hours of fantasy tropes, and that's what gives it that kind of Netflixy second screen viewing quality. You don't really feel inclined to pay attention to a lot of it because it really does feel like you've seen a lot of it before. It becomes even harder to pay attention to it given how much exposition and lore dumping is going on all the time. Avowed is set in the same universe as the Pillars of Eternity games. Those are two extremely dense CRPGs which are kind of famous for the richness of their lore. So like I said in the intro, it's an exciting prospect stepping into a universe where so much world building had already been done. But that ended up being a real monkey paw wish because, yeah, there's a lot of lore here, but Obsidian exercised absolutely no restraint in their desire to surface it and no deftness in execution either. Every new character you meet, it's like they've been waiting their whole lives for the chance to either lore dump or trauma dump or both. It makes every interaction feel so utilitarian. Like, just as a point of contrast, playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, you'll meet so many characters, and they have things that they want to get off their chest, sure, but they also have personalities, and when you chat with them, you aren't spending half the conversation learning about the history of farming in the region or being introduced to 6 new proper nouns that will never get mentioned again throughout the rest of your playthrough. NPC interactions in Avowed often feel like an interactive lore glossary where you're punching in queries and getting automated responses. That really hurts the regional storylines that the game is trying to tell. There are 4 main regions, and each of them has an arc involving local leaders and the way they're grappling with both the encroaching Aedean Empire and the Dream Scourge. The leaders of these regions should be memorable figures, but I met them all again at the conclusion of the game and I was like, oh yeah, I remember you, I think. Because we had spent so much time discussing who they were, what they represented, and the history of their region, we never really got around to the part where I might become invested in who they are personally. So the main plot is not good. The regional plots are not good, and the broader dialogue sags under the weight of lore dumps. But unfortunately, there's one final piece that really seals the deal on just how disappointing the writing in Avowed is, and it's the companions. There are 4 of them you'll meet on your journey. The first is Kai, and he, frankly, is awesome. He's a mercenary who's been roped in to help you, and he's voiced by the same person who voices Garrus Vakarian from Mass Effect. There's something incredibly comforting about that voice. It's like a warm hug.
You need to find the ambassador, and I need to find the claviger. How's about we partner up?
But he's also the most real of the companions. Like, he feels like an actual human being with a complex range of emotions. The others all feel so one-dimensional, but also just kind of unpleasant to be around. Like, I never found myself wanting to talk more to them because they never surprised me by doing or saying anything cool. They were just there to either praise or criticize the decisions I made without having the backbone to do anything about it. And this comes back to the point I made earlier about that voice in my head. I made some decisions in this game that were very, very contrary to the interests of my companions, and while they might get pissy about it and chew me out, they'd immediately then seem to forget all about that in the next conversation, and we'd reset to neutral. There's no companion relationship meter here because I don't think relationship status is being tracked at all. And that means that very warm and affectionate dialogue feels really out of place when 2 seconds earlier, you know, I'd literally slaughtered half of the population of their hometown. There are plenty of counterpoint examples to everything I've described, by the way, in the sense that you are going to be able to find an instance where one of your companions does remember that fucked up thing that you did and does bring it up later on. Absolutely, sure. But in between those 2 moments are dozens and dozens of hours where your relationship is totally peachy, and in no way does it feel like your relationship should. It's the perfect example of what I mentioned earlier. Avowed struggles to make consequences felt. Yes, the companion will chastise you at one point for doing something they don't agree with, but can you feel as though your relationship to that companion has diminished? No, absolutely not. At every layer of the narrative pyramid, Avowed falters. The foundations of a compelling world are there, but they're laboriously surfaced in a way that suffocates moment-to-moment dialogue. As a result, character personalities fail to emerge, making interactions feel impersonal and transactional. Companions are boring to talk to, and it never feels like anything you say to them really matters. The regional storylines that unfold all feel overly brisk and uneventful, and the main plot is a collection of painfully drawn-out fantasy tropes. People come to these sorts of games for their writing and characters, and I can't imagine that many people are going to walk away from this wishing they could have just one more fireside chat with a companion, or satisfied with the conclusion to the main quest line that you could have seen coming from the first hour of the game.
We've got trouble. Uninvited company. Something's not right here.
When it comes to world design, there are 3 categories of spaces you can explore in Avowed: cities, the open world, and dungeons. The good news is that 2 out of 3 of these are great. The bad news is that one of them is very bad. So let's do the bad one first. Cities in Avowed are terrible. Much like Veilguard, cities or settlements look like movie sets, permanently suspended in the moment before the director yells action. Nothing moves, nothing seems to be happening. Everyone is just standing around. And I guess there must be some technical reason for this, because when NPCs do move, there's this weird stuttering effect that kicks in as their character models track across space. But yeah, the towns really do feel like they're in alpha form. Like the geometry is all there, but Obsidian forgot to add in the people, and when they did add them, they definitely did not give them any reason to be there. Connected to this, there are no social game systems. Now, when I'm out in the wild and I see some dried fish there for the taking, I'm gonna steal it because who's gonna stop me, right? But when I'm in the city and I steal someone's food from their kitchen while they're in that kitchen watching me do it, I expect there to be some consequences. In Avowed though, not so much. In Avowed, there is no concept of theft. No one minds you lockpicking their chest of valuables right in front of them. There are no guards who will chastise you for doing something wrong because there's nothing that you can do that's wrong. There's no way to attack NPCs. I remember one time, and I don't have footage of this, so I apologize, but I was walking through town and I saw two people standing over a corpse. One of them was kneeling over it and the other one was just looking on, very concerned. I approached it and it was clear that the person lying down had been murdered and these two people were investigating. On the ground next to the corpse was a dagger, and so I just picked it up. And the guy kneeling down says, "Hey, this is a murder scene." And that's all he does. He doesn't try and arrest me. He doesn't even stand up. He just stays in that same kneeling position, not saying anything while I walk off with this murder weapon. When Avowed was revealed, it was a really interesting pitch because it was basically Obsidian taking a swing at the Elder Scrolls formula. But a crucial part of a Bethesda game is the reactivity of their worlds, the physics of objects, the social systems that govern how the world responds to your actions. I understand that creating that sort of sandbox is really tough, absolutely. But like, Warhorse just did it with a team of 200 people on a $40 million budget. Regardless of what Obsidian were or were not shooting for here, the lack of responsiveness of the world in a first-person RPG experience like this really stings, and it massively undermines how immersive an experience like this can be. And it's like, what's the limitation here, you know? Like, Obsidian is not a scrappy startup, it's a legacy studio that is now owned by a $1 trillion corporation. I don't think it's unreasonable for us to expect NPCs that move in our cities. Anyway, it's a much better news story when you get beyond the city walls and head out into the wilds, and it's at this point where the review kind of pivots to start talking about all the stuff that I actually liked about Avowed. Firstly, this is a really good looking video game, or at least I think it is. It's more about the art style than its technical wizardry though. Like, this game does have ray tracing, for example, but you'll barely notice it. What you will notice are these vast draw distances, this intricate geography, these saturated colors, and this highly stylized architecture. It's a game that confidently strikes out towards its own unique style, and I think it really nails it. The vistas in particular really pull me in because they're real, and what I mean by that is Obsidian's Outer Worlds was all about its impressive skyboxes, which made environments look cool, but they weren't actually that good when you got up close to them. Here in Avowed, a lot of what you can see, you can actually go there. Not all of it, but enough of it, such that when you enter a new biome and take it all in for the first time, you can be confident you're not getting yourself all hyped up only to be met with invisible walls. The spaces are actually much bigger than they first appear, given how vertical these worlds are. Very often you'll be forced to find a way up a cliff line so you can access an entirely new area. Very often you'll be thrust deep down into an expansive dungeon. You really have no sense of a given area's density until you actually step foot into it, and that makes it very exciting to explore because you never know what you're going to find. The process of exploring the living lands was easily my favorite part of Avowed, more so than its impressive combat, to be honest. I've said many times before that I'm a bit of a sucker for that Ubisoft map marker clearing thing. I don't like to overdose on it, but I like a little bit of it, and Avowed sort of scratches that same itch in its own way. Except here, Obsidian aren't relying on map markers. They're just letting you stumble around until you find something cool. I think that's actually the best fun to be found in Avowed. There's a big map and all of it is blank when you arrive. You got to pick up your main quests and your side quests, sure, but to be honest, they're never that impressive. So the best thing you can do is just look at something in the distance and head toward it. A lot of the time, you will be pleasantly surprised by what you find because the landscape is littered with all manner of secret and puzzle and collectible, and they're all squirreled away in some clever way. One time I found a labyrinthine cave network that had a perk upgrade point at the end of it. Another time I found a ruined tower littered with traps that had a mini boss at the top. Another time I found a hidden sewer system that had some high level materials waiting for me. It's all simple stuff, and it is a bit of a bummer that these locations aren't better integrated into the game's narrative. I think that's what makes them feel more Ubisoft-esque than we might have expected for a game like this. This really does feel like you're exploring video game worlds full of video game stuff, rather than being immersed in a rich landscape that is capable of telling its own stories. But even despite this shortcoming, It's fun, and it stayed fun for the game's entire runtime. Right up until the end, I would be headed towards my next major quest objective, but I'd still keep myself open to the possibility of new discoveries. I'd still follow my nose to see where it led me, and invariably, those off-the-beaten-path discoveries were always more satisfying and more rewarding than anything the main quest lines ever served up. One of the best discoveries you can chance upon are dungeons, and there's only a few of them here, but I like them. They have a few puzzles to solve, a few mini-boss encounters to get through, some nice loot upgrades to collect. In an ideal world, Obsidian would have set more time aside to deliver a few more of these, because they are the high points of both the open world exploration and the main quest lines, but what's here is good. You know what else is good? Combat. You might have already seen some reviews for Avowed by now. They are all, to a number, praising its combat, and that's both accurate and surprising. Accurate because, yes, the combat rules, and surprising because I don't think anyone was expecting that first-person melee and spell-slinging combat would be the most lauded feature of an Obsidian release, or any release, really. First-person fantasy combat is notoriously difficult to do well. You have to solve two problems at the same time. You have to make melee combat feel good when you don't have any character animations to rely on, and you also have to make spell-slinging good when magic missiles provide a hell of a lot less feedback than an M14 rifle or a Doom shotgun does. Obsidian really zeroed in on these challenges and solved both of them brilliantly. In the case of melee, they understood that you can't really make first-person melee combat much deeper, but you can make it feel way better. You can slow down gameplay at the moment of impact. You can make sure enemies ragdoll properly in response to your strikes. You can make sure enemies reel when you hit them with charged attacks. You can make the parry sound fucking loud so that it's satisfying as hell when you land it. You're still doing all the same things you were doing in Skyrim, which is pulling the right trigger over and over again, but it just looks and feels so much better here. It's the best first-person melee combat you're going to find outside of like Darktide and Dying Light, and those are games that are like best in class. Me though, I chose to play as a spell slinger, and goddamn was that a good call. Not because the melee is bad, of course, but because the spell slinging just absolutely rules. I can't think of a game that's done first-person spell slinging as well as this. You've got a wand for basic attacks, which feels great to use, and in the offhand you've got a spell book which lets you cast 4 spells. You can then combine that with 4 more spells you can bind to the D-pad. At that point you've got 8 spells you're cycling between, and if you've got enough essence to sustain you, you can just go absolutely ham, throwing out single target spells, CC, AoE and buffs, all while remaining extremely mobile. It's super exciting and super satisfying, but also very strategic, and I think that's something that's going to get overlooked in Avowed's combat model. Yes, the inputs are great, but the combat chess of it is also surprisingly strong. There aren't a huge number of enemy types, but there's enough of them used smartly enough that you can't just target whatever you see. There are healers who put out such a ridiculous amount of healing that leaving them up is suicide. There are archers who will smartly reposition, forcing you to avoid their sightlines. There are mages who can summon minions that will overwhelm you unless you burn that mage down, and there are melee bruisers who will interrupt your casting unless you either CC them or dodge their attacks. Looking at all this footage, you might be thinking, that looks a little spammy, like just cast every spell you can as soon as it's off cooldown and that's it. But between enemy types, topography, resource management, spell cooldowns, and companion abilities, there's a lot that you're keeping in your head all at once. And when you're really in command of all those things, you can be absolutely devastating. But simultaneously, when you lose focus, then things can fall apart very quickly. So the most frustrating thing you're going to encounter when playing Avowed is the very poorly balanced progression economy and how much that stifles the amount of enjoyment that you could have had while playing this game. Avowed's class design is very free-form, with no restrictions whatsoever on what talents you can pick and what items you can equip. The game will let you carry a blunderbuss in one hand and a spellbook in the other, should you choose. It will also let you run a second weapon loadout that you can switch to on the fly, and there you can carry a magic wand and a one-handed axe if you wanted to. It's entirely about your freedom of choice. Or so you think, until you come up against the economies that underpin all this stuff. The first and biggest bottleneck is the availability of talent points. There are hundreds of talent points you can invest in across the subclass options, but you only get around 25-ish talent points over the course of a playthrough. I'll put it this way, I specialized exclusively in the wizard tree, and if you gave me twice as many points as I got during my playthrough, I would still feel like it's too few and that I wasn't able to properly shape a character that could tap the potential of these skill trees. And that's just if I were to continue specializing in that one tree. Perish the thought of having enough talent points to also make big progress into another tree so that I could really flex into a hybrid build. The obvious response to all of this is, dude, what are you talking about? It's an RPG. You are meant to make class choices and commit to those. You are not meant to have access to everything. The constraints are the point. To which I reply, yes, I know that, but you don't understand how stingy this feels. It's not even enough points to satisfy 1/4 of one tree, and it completely neuters the intent that Obsidian clearly had to encourage hybrid builds and on-the-fly weapon swapping. Related to this is the itemization and the item progression economy. So items in this game are really dull, like wand and axe and sword, and that's it. There's a handful of unique items that have names and some pretty underwhelming effects, but it just feels super generic. It becomes even more generic when you have to level these things up. I used the same wand throughout my entire 30+ hour playthrough because I never once found a unique wand, so I just kept leveling mine up all the way. Common wand +3 became fine wand +0, and so on and so on. Leveling up these weapons does not give them any new capabilities or whatever. It's not like there are dormant bonuses that unlock as you level these things up. It's just straight stats. But more importantly, pushing your weapons and armor into new tiers negates the crippling level gating that the game has baked into its combat. Long story short, there are 5 power tiers in this game, and if I'm fighting a tier 2 enemy with a tier 1 wand, I'll be doing 35% less damage to that enemy, and I will take 35% more damage from them. When this level gating differential is applied, combat feels much more challenging because I die faster, and to be honest with you, I kinda like that. But it's also much more challenging because enemies are so much more fucking spongy and it takes forever to drop even basic enemies. And that part I did not like. So you may be thinking, okay, just level up your gear then, what's the problem? Dude, I tried! You don't know how hard I tried to get my gear leveled up, but the amount of resources it takes to push you into those higher item tiers, it's, I really did do a fair amount of side content in this game, but even then, I was almost always 1 item tier behind whatever I was fighting, and at one point I was 2 item tiers behind. That was especially frustrating because I'd progressed to a zone where I was no longer able to get the old upgrade materials I needed, only the more powerful versions, so I needed to go back to the previous zone and just grind enemies in the open world, hoping they drop what I needed so I could progress to the next item tier. A tier, mind you, that would still be 1 level behind what I should have been at. If you are the kind of player that likes to beeline the main story in a game like this, then Avowed is not for you, because while its side content is optional, the resources that come from exploring the open world are anything but optional, and the punishment for not playing the game the way that Obsidian wants you to is to be fighting against meat sack enemies with seemingly endless health pools who can KO you in 3 hits if you aren't paying attention. So Obsidian, if you're watching, here's my suggestion. Double the amount of perk points that we get whilst leveling, and halve the resource requirements for all item progression. That way I can make full use of the excellent combat model you have built here, either by reaching the true potential of a single class, or allowing me to explore hybrid builds, while also neutralizing these level gating breakpoints that result in this spongy feeling combat.
I knew you'd come around. You miss me.
I'll let you think that.
To finish up, I want to come back to a point I made earlier about Avowed's challenge in making consequences seen and felt. To be clear, you do make many impactful decisions in this game. You will decide the fate of hundreds or thousands of innocents. You will choose which factions to prop up or rat out. You will spar with the gods themselves and determine their fate too. In big and small moments, you will choose what to do or say, and there will be consequences for those choices, absolutely. But very rarely can you see or feel the impact of those choices. Like when you doom a population to die, you don't see some elaborate cutscene showing those events unfold. It's almost like a Rube Goldberg machine, where you see the first part of the kinetic chain, and then the camera just stays fixed on that starting point, and then a few seconds later a flashcard pops up that reads, "Heaps of people died because of what you just did." I'm exaggerating, but I'm also kind of not, and it's hard to make this specific point without spoiling things, but I really felt this a lot when playing through Avowed. I want meaningful choices in a game like this, but the choice to blow up Megaton becomes a lot less meaningful if I can't watch that mushroom cloud go up. Something similar can be said of my relationship to companions. I don't just want there to be individual dialogue options for being the nice guy and being the dick. I want the general shape of our conversations to evolve in recognition of how much I've been a nice guy or a dick. To stretch the Fallout 3 analogy further, I don't want to see them get mad at me once for destroying their hometown. I want to see that mushroom cloud in their eyes every time I look at them. Is it unfair to want these things? Partly yes, in the sense that implementing these sorts of responsive game systems is really hard. But also partly no, because I think it's fair to have pretty high expectations of a studio like Obsidian, one now backed by all the might of Microsoft. Like if a Sony game was trying to do Sony game things, but also not doing a very good job of it, I'd be like, what gives, Sony? If the next Zelda game is mediocre, I'd be like, Jesus, what the fuck is happening at Nintendo HQ? I don't think it's entitled to expect great games from great studios who are owned by platform holders. Instead, we get these barren, lifeless cities populated by a handful of NPCs that can't move, and when they do move, it looks like they're bugging out. Avowed has some great world design and some fantastic combat, and that was a really pleasant surprise, but it came at the expense of the most integral parts of an experience like this. Its writing is weak, its main storyline is weak, its companions are weak, its RPG and itemization systems are generic and unbalanced. It's yet another one of these very surface level RPGs from a major studio who have made better, deeper RPGs in the past. And I really don't love this recent trend of combining shallow writing with shallow RPG elements in the hope that you'll make your game accessible enough to people who might not otherwise be interested in it. Spoiler alert, that's not interesting to anyone, full stop. Avowed is a bit of fun here and there, but it's not in the least bit interesting. And that's a real shame for a studio that has made so many deeply interesting video games in the past. Okay, so for me, this is one of the most exciting sponsored shoutouts in the history of the channel. By now, many of you will know Lost in Cult. They celebrate the art form of video games in a variety of beautiful and thoughtful ways, like their recent Outer Wilds design work collection. This featured over 250 pages of interviews, essays, and perspectives on the game that forever changed the way we think about video games. Well, that team is back at it with something that is, believe it or not, even more shill-up coded. Lost in Cult, in collaboration with Cook and Becker and the actual Crystal Dynamics, they have teamed up to deliver two landmark projects that bring fans back to the grim gothic world of Nosgoth, with the Legacy of Kain, the Book of Nosgoth, and Legacy of Kain, Scourge of the Sarafan. Designed to celebrate the storied franchise's rich lore and enduring legacy, Legacy of Kain, the Book of Nosgoth will serve as the definitive official encyclopedia, fully chronicling the series' lore, characters, and development history for the very first time. Written by veteran games journalist Nick Rubin, and with a foreword from yours truly, the Book of Nosgoth features sections dedicated to Nosgoth's varied locations, factions, and inhabitants, alongside a detailed timeline of the Kain and Raziel saga. You'll also find original concept art, sketches, maps, exclusive behind-the-scenes interviews with the developers, and an archival exploration of the creation of all 5 games, showcasing insights from the artists and visionaries behind this gothic masterpiece. So that's the encyclopedia, but the Legacy of Kain, Scourge of the Sarafan will stand as a brand new tabletop role-playing game set prior to the events of Blood Omen during the Sarafan Order's crusade against the vampiric Scourge. This tabletop RPG experience uses a third-party license of the critically acclaimed Morkboard rule set to deliver a lethal and atmospheric RPG experience, featuring minimalist, approachable dark fantasy gameplay, modified mechanics to fit the lore of Legacy of Kain, and high-stakes gameplay with a D20 dice system. With 6 playable classes, Sarafan weapons and abilities, and a bestiary of nocturnal horrors, players can forge their path in a campaign focused on vampire hunts, Nosgoth's hidden history, and incursions into the spectral realm. Both items are as beautiful as you've come to expect from the design-focused Lost in Cult, with stunning art, illustrations, and design frills. What's more, both the encyclopedia and the tabletop role-playing game have deluxe editions available, with the Book of Nosgoth Deluxe Edition coming in a premium slipcase, featuring 2 murals depicting the ancient history of Nosgoth, with black and gold foil details on the front, back, and spine, and 4 exclusive art cards contained within. The Scourge of the Sarafan Deluxe Edition is the ultimate way to play and display the game, with its extra items including a Game Master screen featuring ornate murals from British artist Sophie Hollington, a set of 7 sharp-edged dice in blood red with gold glyphs and details, a set of 50 ornately designed character sheets, and a deluxe box with embossed illustrations. So as you might expect, stock for this stuff is going to be extremely limited, and pre-orders on Backer Kit close on February 28th. A very special Legacy of Kain Complete Edition will be available exclusively to backers in this pre-order period, which combines the extravagant deluxe editions of both the encyclopedia and the tabletop role-playing game together in a luxurious presentation box with a flocked suede cover, textured base tray, and gold foil embossing, making it the ultimate must-have keepsake collectible for Legacy of Kain fans. It really is the most stunning tribute to the series I've seen outside of like the No-Clip documentary. It is amazing, and I'm so thrilled to be contributing to it in a very small way. If you want to grab it for yourself, then be sure to get in quick, as that pre-order window does close on February 28th. Link below the like button. Thanks to Lost in Cult for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.